Hello everybody, I hope you all are doing good. Today in this short video, we will talk about SharePoint 2016. SharePoint is a pretty extensive software, and depending upon who you ask, you are going to get a lot of different kind of viewpoints about SharePoint 2016. It can pretty much be called a business collaboration platform and would allow you to do several of these things. We will talk about the collaboration, the social networking, the portals and internal websites that we can develop, the enterprise content management, and also two other things that the SharePoint would allow you to do is incorporate business intelligence along with some business applications. So our goal in this video is to talk or see a very wide, a big picture of the SharePoint platform and gain an understanding of how or what exactly do we mean by SharePoint, and also talk about some of the basic level of SharePoint uses. As we delve more into the SharePoint, I would like to go back and start the discussion of SharePoint from where we had left our earlier discussion. Remember our SaaS, IaaS or PaaS services? So the question is, what is SharePoint? Is it, or where would I identify, or where would I group my SharePoint? The slide that you see on your screen tells you how we would define these individual services. So as you can see to the very left under packaged software, we are going to be involved in loading applications, data, middleware, software, servers. So we as an IT organization would be involved with managing and using some of these applications, whereas everything to the right are the services that you can avail from the cloud. So you can go as an infrastructure, as a platform, or as a software. So if I want to categorize my SharePoint, where would it fall? One of the views that you are going to hear from users is this is a SaaS or a software application service. And yes, you can justify that because this can be hosted on your server and be managed partly by your IT administrator, but it could also be a cloud service. So depending upon how you use it, it could be categorized under SaaS, but then you have some organization who actually use the SharePoint as their development platform. Everything that the developers would develop has to be used through a software or a SharePoint platform, and in that case I would argue that it could also be categorized as a PaaS, which is platform as a service. So it really depends upon how you are using SharePoint in your organization. As we mentioned a little earlier, let's talk a little bit about how SharePoint would be used, or how SharePoint can be deployed in your organization. The SharePoint, if you go with the SharePoint Server 2016, it could be hosted by your organization, and your IT people would be installing the SharePoint on the servers that are being maintained at your organization or at your data center. In that case, that SharePoint server would include a set of applications that will deliver all of the functionality of the SharePoint. When it is installed locally and managed by your IT department, you are using what is called the on-premise environment of SharePoint because it is hosted on your local premises. There could also be a SharePoint Online, and this would be a cloud-based service that Microsoft would allow, which would allow you to create much of the same SharePoint experience as you can see with your previous installation, which is your Server 2016 locally installed. The only difference is you do not have to install it or maintain it. It can actually come bundled as an Office 365 monthly subscription, giving you access to a bunch of services that you would find, like your email, your calendars, your Exchange, your Skype, and these are what we refer to as the collaboration softwares and various different kinds of softwares that you would find in your SharePoint. If I go back to my previous slide here, remember we mentioned something about collaboration and social networking, and by including or having the capability of including something like Skype or Skype for Business or your conferencing with Exchange, those are the functionalities that we are referring to. Let's talk a little bit about the different kinds of SharePoint views. If you ask people how do they use the SharePoint, you are going to come across a wide variety of answers with different views. As I mentioned in my opening statement, your SharePoint 2016 is your business collaboration platform. This is how SharePoint would like to, or Microsoft would like to market it. It can have different types of user depending upon your role. And also, these users that are using SharePoint would have different kind of experiences. If you are an administrator and you're assigned to create a SharePoint website, you would have a different experience than somebody who is just an anonymous user of SharePoint. The result of a person's view of SharePoint is greatly affected by how that person would use that product. It also has many different administration levels, and each of those levels would use different kinds of technical ability. Somebody who is pretty comfortable with application softwares like Word or Excel, they really should not have any problem administrating the SharePoint site. But at a much higher level or a deeper level, there could be a need for these SharePoint administrators to also know about the infrastructure and the services that needs to be associated with SharePoint. So let's talk about the different roles of the users. SharePoint is a platform where the user rules an organization defines would depend upon the organization itself or the business itself. So these are some of the possible uses. You can be a visitor of SharePoint, and you can either be an anonymous visitor or a named visitor. An anonymous visitor would be a person that would just browse to a website and just happens to be using the SharePoint platform. It is really browsing the website and really nothing else. However, if you are a visitor but you are included in a site, then you would also be browsing to this site and would be authenticated by either an email, and if you have any picture associated with it, you will probably see your picture being showing on the top right hand corner of the page. So the visitor in this case, when you are named, would still see the SharePoint site as any other website, except that he would notice his name and his picture on the top right corner. You can also have SharePoint users who are very casual users. They could be included to review or browse company documents when they are posted on that site. The SharePoint knows when, or the SharePoint users would see when these documents are being uploaded on their personal site. I have seen, or sometimes SharePoints are being implemented in certain organizations where they use it as a communication platform. And we will take a look into more of the terminology as we go a little further into the SharePoint. But sometimes the companies would create a site and would invite some people where they would use that for more seamless communication. So to a casual user, you might see that this is just a link to a platform with a certain name that the administrator had given to that site. So they can call it, communication site or a knowledge center. So depending upon the name or the web platform name, they could actually use the SharePoint platform and also utilize the tools that are built within the SharePoint platform. This also includes the next category, which are my SharePoint user with experience. So this user is not only familiar with the main SharePoint features, but can also get into more functionality and dive deeper. They may be aware of the routing documents, the user workflows, and the building site hierarchies. The last kind of users could be your technical administrators. Most of the time, these are your IT professionals who is responsible for this platform or the SharePoint platform. So the technical administrator is not very concerned with the business, but is more involved in making sure that this platform is available and responsive. Depending upon your administrative roles in SharePoint, you can even break out individual categories as front-end developers or front-end server, web front server developers, application servers, and database servers. Let's look at the technical part of SharePoint. And again, we will keep it at a pretty basic level. So it is important to understand how SharePoint is put together. It is a web-based platform, and there's a number of technologies that are required to make this platform available. What you see on the screen is sometimes referred to as a technology stack, where you see that you have the computer hardware, and in our case, this is the regular computer, where you have an operating system, which is our Windows servers. So definitely running a Windows server operating system. On top of the server OS or operating system, you also have some more or additional technologies that are required by SharePoint. In particular, the SharePoint would need a database and a web server, and since it's a Microsoft product, we are going to be looking at the SQL Server and a web server, and again, since it's a Microsoft product, we are probably going to be looking at an IIS service, Microsoft Internet Information Services, or IIS web server. In addition, it would also need an Active Directory. As I said earlier, I'm not going to get into a lot of the technical details because the class is not about getting into the technical details. It's about the SharePoint administrator, SharePoint, using of SharePoint, the features, and how we can go about create sites and use the SharePoint in the business application. So it definitely needs some Active Directory. Now, from time to time, I'll point out where those things would come into play. As you would create those sites, you will see that those emails that you're adding, if it is within a WAN or within a network, you will see those emails pop up pretty quick because it's actually pulling the information from a data server. So SharePoint is something that you're creating for your organization, which actually includes the people who are already there in the data. So that's where your database is actually coming in. Let's look a little more into the GUI or the application feature. So when you start your SharePoint, this is what you look like. You have two separate configurations. You have a team site and a communication site. Now, I would like to comment one thing here, that as a part of SharePoint, there is an additional application called Teams that Microsoft offers. What you see on your screen is not the same. This is a team site that you are creating, which allows you to bring together a group of people within your organization. The team application that Microsoft offers is something separate, and it may or may not be activated by your IT administrator. We will talk about Teams separately. So these are the templates, and the templates that are available would dictate the kind of SharePoint site that you are creating. And of course, it will give you particular features that are associated with that. You can, as an administrator, you can always add more features or remove features from these templates. So what I show you here is your team site, and as you can see, it is a site that you will be creating, or it is a site that would allow you to share documents, keep track of events, manage tasks, and more. And then you also have your communication site. When you start creating your team site, this is the next thing that you're going to be seeing. So this is your GUI interface. The one to your left, which says the team site, with my picture on the right, is actually a site that I have created, and I called it CTS 2361 SharePoint users, and you all had probably received an email since I have created the site for and invited you all to join in. We will get into more details of it later, and we will be working more towards it. I want to point out that when you see that little picture of me on the top right hand corner, it is telling you that you are not an anonymous user. Remember what we talked about a little earlier? This is actually authenticated with a picture, and since I had a picture associated with it, it actually pulled up that picture, kind of made it a little more personal. So it is authenticated, named, and the information has been pulled from the database. And of course, this is something that can be used online, so it is also going to be using a web server. The picture or the slide, the image that you see onto the side, to the right hand side, is a general image of how you can create a new SharePoint site. So as you can see, you would have to give a title, you would have to give a description, and then you can choose one of the templates. Okay, now this is the part that could be seen a little differently, because remember what I talked about, depending upon how your IT has set up your SharePoint, some of the features could be a little different. So what you see on the right, that image on the right, is a general snapshot of how or what you might see when you're creating a new SharePoint site. The image to your left is a little different because our organization had given me certain rights, and that is why it might look a little different. But generally they are trying to create two different sites. This is actually a step further. This is the team site that I have created for you, and I have included all of you in this site, where we would be using the SharePoint, or you will be using this platform to communicate and see how the functionality is going to help us in conducting our business for this class. Again, pointing out, if you look at the very top right, it's an authenticated with some name, and onto your left you're actually seeing some of the tabs. So right now you're seeing the home tab. However, if you click on the notebook or the document or the pages, according to what you click on the left, your right hand side GUI interface is going to change. Hopefully this had given you some basic understanding of SharePoint 2016. Thank you.